Okay, so we're going to talk about testers are dying. Actually, we just put that in to be a provocative title to upset some of you. There's already been a few tweets about, oh no, not another keynote about testers dying. But when we were first asked to do this keynote, we thought, well, what do we know about testing? And we looked around, and my very first job, actually, I was a tester at Microsoft. And we had a 1-to-1 ratio of developers to testers. That's what it took to build software back then. And we look around today and we don't really see that. So we see teams with maybe one tester for a team of about 5 or 6 developers if they're lucky. Sometimes it's one tester for 2 teams of that. We've got a couple of clients where they don't have testers. The developers just test now, and then we just ask the product owner and the customer to do some testing. So we see some of that. We often hear, well, developers can write automated tests, so why do we need testers anyway? So, we thought, well, clearly testers are dying, so let's think about what can we say about that. And we thought, coming from Africa, and, we have all these great animals, that we know something about nature conservation, so we thought, let's put the two together, and we can create an awesome talk. So that's what we thought we were going to talk about. But then what happened, Sam?
So then, the lights went out.
And we were kind of left in the dark.
So, what you don't know about South Africa is we have a severe electricity shortage. And so we go through something called load shedding, which means for up to 3 hours a day, you have no electricity. So this happens quite often. And then all plans are gone, because if your laptop battery is not lasting those 3 hours, it's over.
We bought a UPS just for our router, because that's the one thing that we don't have enough battery power to last.
You can put the lights back on now, thanks.
Just so all know what it feels like to live in South Africa.
So what we realized when the lights went off is that testers aren't actually dying. What's really happening is the same as our electricity demand in Africa. There's just more demand than there is capacity. And so what's really happening is we need more testing capacity in the world. We need more people to be able to do this stuff.
So in true Agile fashion, we just at the last minute decided to change the title of our talk. So instead, what we're going to talk about is how do you keep up with demand. And we have for you some lessons learned from darkest Africa, and we really do mean darkest Africa. So as we were introduced, I'm Karen, and that's Sam, and we're from a company called Growing Agile. As I said, I started my career as a tester, and I've been pretty much every role in between until now. I'm an Agile coach and trainer.
I started out as a developer, but I did do a lot of testing. I'm not one of those developers. And now I'm an Agile coach. I sensed some disbelief.
Yeah.
Cool. So this over here is something you see in our country quite often. So load shedding, where we have no electricity, has been happening since 2008, and it's just getting worse and worse. And the company that supplies our electricity is called Eskom. That's the name at the top. And so a whole bunch of restaurants have special menus for Eskom, and you might be able to read. There's a lot of salad on there and raw foods and that. And that's just how it is in our country.
Yeah.
And we've been dealing with bad jokes for a while.
So what Sam and I decided to do was take a look at what's happened in South Africa since 2008, dealing with the shortage of electricity and how we dealt with it. And we kind of identified 6 stages that we've gone through as a country towards dealing with this shortage. And what we thought we could do today is take you through that process for what's happened with electricity, and then we're going to take you through that process of how we think we can apply that to growing the capacity of testing in the world. So these are the 6 stages. I'm not going to read through them because you can read our slides for us because they're beautifully illustrated by Sam. But we're going to talk through what these things are quickly for what happened with us with the electricity.
So the first stage is awareness, and basically this means the adverts on television and in the streets and on signposts are trying to make you aware that there's a power crisis. So it's highlighting when you're in high power usage and when you should rather be switching off everything in your house rather than using power, and how you can how you can be more aware of the problem in the country. What it doesn't do is change people's behavior. It just makes them aware that there is a problem. Lights Out does that too.
Cool. And then kind of soon after awareness, what we started seeing was kind of punishment. So ESCOM rates are going up massively. Yeah, it's kind of a sign. And we also have different tariffs. So if you use more electricity, you pay much, much more than the lower stuff. And so, again, it doesn't really change people's behavior, but now they start to feel really annoyed by this problem. So, again, like awareness, people are aware of it. Sometimes they're paying for it. Unless you're really, really cash-strapped, it actually still doesn't change your behavior.
The next stage is personal responsibility. So this is when individuals start feeling responsible and start doing something about the problem. And in South Africa, what happened was people changed their light bulbs to energy-saving light bulbs. They also put blankets around their geysers so that the geysers didn't use as much electricity to heat up. Little things like that. But that's 1 in a million. Like one person in this room would do it for a suburb. It wasn't a lot of people.
But after personal responsibility, what we started to see is that ESCOM started getting a little bit smarter, and they thought, hang on, if we incentivize people to do this and we make it easier, then maybe they'll help us a little bit more rather than just punishing them. So we had some schemes like this, which is if you install a solar geyser, which costs quite a lot of money, so 15,000 Rand is, well, it's not a lot of money these days. It's about $1,500. You could get 33% of that money back from ESCOM. So you were reducing the load on ESCOM and you were actually getting something that worked for you. So you had a solar geyser for your house. So we started to see lots of these things which made it easier for people to do it. So if people wanted to do it in the past, but they couldn't really because they couldn't afford it or it didn't make sense, this started incentivizing it because the barrier was reduced.
The next step was visible impact. So particularly for those individuals that were really trying to save electricity, they wanted to see how much electricity they were saving or how much they were consuming so that they could reduce it even more. And so we see these are personal electricity monitors that people plug into their houses so they can actually see how many kilowatts of electricity they are using at any point in time.
So, and then finally, what we started to see now when we were researching this, we found this, it's an office block in South Africa. It's actually literally down the road from my house. And it is the first office block in South Africa that is officially giving back to the grid. So on the roof there, you'll see a whole bunch of solar panels. And when they put it together, it's one of the greenest buildings that we have in South Africa. They put it together to generate enough power for themselves as an office block so that they wouldn't be dependent on ESCOM. And that's kind of, a nice sell for their tenants. And what they found out is they were actually generating more than they needed in some areas. So they've agreed now with the Cape Town municipality that they give that electricity back to the grid and they're actually buying it from this office park. So this is the start of something that we think is going to end up being massive. So lots of people are now talking about can neighborhoods generate their own power and can they give that back to the grid as a neighborhood? Maybe you could generate power as a neighborhood and as a result pay less rates as a general neighborhood. So these are the things that are starting to happen in South Africa. I reckon within 10 years we won't need ESCOM anymore because we will all have ways of generating enough power. You might have heard we have a lot of sunshine, so like solar power is really a no-brainer for us. Okay.
So before you all fall asleep, what does this have to do with testing? Karen doesn't know how to work.
My fingers are as clumsy as my legs.
So I'm going to struggle to see what you're doing, but I'm going to ask you to put up your hands if you feel pressure at the end of a sprint.
I see some hands, Sam. I see a few
Okay,
hands.
I'd say that's about 80% of the room. Excellent, thank you. Put up your hands if you're often asked to release without testing or pressured to do this.
Because come on, we just got to get that thing out to
Less
the
hands,
customers.
but there are some.
Oh, I'm running ahead again.
Put up your hands if testing is always behind development.
Oh, I see a lot of hands there.
Okay, we're on about 70%.
I upside down today.
And put up your hands if there's a lot of blame around bugs. You didn't build this properly, you didn't test this properly, any of that? I know there's more. Come on.
There's some honest people over here.
Okay, and put up your hands if automation is at least one sprint behind. Okay, lots of hands.
Yeah, I see
Excellent.
lots of hands for that one.
So this is what we notice when we go into organizations. These are common problems, which leads us to our assumption that there is more demand than capacity for testing in teams.
So what we're going to do now is look at those same 6 steps and say, how does that relate to testing and what can we do? What do we even see? And we kind of see these same steps in organizations. So the first one is that awareness one, letting people know that quality is important, letting people know the impact of testing. We were looking for some metrics. I think this was our favorite one because it's got not just bugs found, but bugs squished too, which was quite fun. But, I mean, how many of you got some form of metric around number of defects found in production or number of bugs this or... Yeah, some bug metrics. Okay, so most organizations have at least this level of awareness. We know that quality is important. We know we should have it. We want bugs to be less. And we might have a big dashboard that we show people with the number of bugs that we found. But like with the electricity thing, so you know it's a problem, but does it really change your behavior? And do you even know what behavior you need to change to make that graph go down? I mean, is it one of those complex things where like, we did this thing and the graph went up, but we don't know why. And then we did this thing and the graph went down, but we don't know why. So, okay, we have a graph, but it's not really useful. So that's kind of the awareness stage.
Next up, we have punishment. And in agile teams, this punishment shows up fairly quickly. Hands up if you have a regression sprint or a hardening sprint before you go to production.
A release sprint.
Okay. So what we notice with these regression sprints and release sprints is that they only get longer. So this year it's 1 sprint, next year it's 2 sprints. The next year it's probably 3 sprints. And this is painful. This is painful on the testers, it's painful on the developers, it's very painful on the product owners who just want their thing in production. And this is your punishment. This pain is your punishment.
So moving on to personal responsibility, we start to see this happening when there's people in organizations who deeply care about quality and want to make a change. And so they say, well, how can we help? And I think that all of you here are probably those people because you wouldn't be at a conference like this if you didn't want to take personal responsibility for improving quality and testing in your organization. So you're probably all the people who do this stuff already. When we work with teams, we've got a couple of really simple techniques that we share with them that they can do as individuals in their teams to start taking some personal responsibility for testing and doing testing better in their agile teams. So this is a board from one of our clients. They're a client that likes their confidentiality, so I've blurred everything. But you can still kind of get the gist of it. And so the first thing you'll notice is before this team started doing Scrum, they worked they were a support team. All they do is they fix tickets, issues, bugs, and on all sorts of systems. And they worked as an isolated set of developers, and they had, I think it's 1 tester in the team. They have 1 tester in the team, and the tester would test everything that all the developers had done, and it was kind of a bottleneck. And so we spoke to them, and the first thing we said to them is, and they used to have, the testing thing of like, well, it's all been done, now it goes through testing. And so the first thing we said is get rid of the test column. This is something we learned from Janet and Lisa a long time ago. But switch that to a show me column. So instead of it being a column which says that testing must happen after development, the thing that should happen after any task is to share what you've done with someone else. And some people say, so it's like a review column. And we're like, well, it's like a review column, but if your version of doing code reviews is to submit a request into a code review tool and ask your peer to check out your thing and look at your code and give you comments, that's not what we mean by a review. We literally mean show me, because it's like, hey, Sam, come over here. Can I just quickly show you what I did? What do you think?
I think you're not very good at this. And you should change this and this and this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So have you ever asked someone to come over and then you explain something, you're like, I've got a problem, can you, and then you're like, wait, never mind, I solved it for myself. The value of these reviews, the value of show me, is actually in explaining what you did to someone else. So what we say with the show me column is after every single task that you do, grab someone on your team, quickly show them what it is, talk through your process. The benefits are that you get to talk through it. You get to do your review on the fly as quickly as you do the task. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. And then also every single piece of code, every test case, every document that you create has suddenly had 2 people in the team who've seen it. So you've just doubled all your knowledge, and you've got no more, silos where only one person knows how that code works. So the show me column is the first thing we do. And the second thing is to start doing your test tasks on different colors. So in this group, you can see the test tasks are actually the purple stickies. And they're just work that has to happen. What this does is it breaks that dependency from the testing work must happen after the development work. Because pretty much 90% of test tasks can happen before development if you just switch your mindset to thinking about it. You can set up test environments, you can set up test data, you can decide what you're going to test, you can even write automated test cases before you write the code. The only things that you can't do is literally anything that requires executing the code. But to me, that's a really, really, really small percentage of testing. Because a lot of testing is really about the thinking process that happens before you write any code. So these are just some of the ways that somebody who's on a team who wants to take personal responsibility can start influencing their team to start looking at testing slightly differently.
Another thing you can do is offer to pair with a developer. So a lot of developers, have you all heard of TDD, test-driven development? A lot of developers actually struggle with that concept because they find it really difficult to think of a test. They find it much easier to think of the solution in code. And you guys have that natural ability. You naturally think of the test first. So if you're sitting with the developer and helping them do their TDD unit tests, it'll probably go a lot faster. Another thing, and this one might be a bit itchy-scratchy, but before you log a bug, go and talk to the developer that wrote the code or whatever. Go and speak to them, because chances are they can fix it faster than you can log the bug. If you can just sit next to them, show them where the bug is, and it gets fixed, there we go. Don't have another bug in the logging system. It's already fixed. Everyone's happy.
Okay, so next up we want to talk about removing barriers. And so this is something that you can do. So you've taken some personal responsibility and you're starting to do some things differently in your team. Removing barriers is about making it easier for other people to help you. So what you want to do is get more people on board on your testing journey. And this could be anyone in the team. So my favorite thing to do at companies, and I've done it at a few, I actually wrote a whole paper for Agile on doing this at a company called Fundamo, is to delete bug databases. Just erase them, gone. And when I did it, it was really, really useful. So we didn't actually erase them because there were some very nervous people, but we did a bulk cleanup that said, closed as part of the 2012 cleanup. If this bug is important to you, please reopen it. I closed 600 bugs that way. Do you know how many were reopened? Anyone guess? 10, 7, no, 1, 3. 3 bugs. And I was like, you know what? We'll fix those bugs. Thank you very much. But suddenly, by not having 600 bugs logged in a bug system, when one bug was found, the developers were like, oh, we can fix that bug. That's cool. So we adopted a zero defect policy. We got rid of the history, and we just said, well, from now on, when we find a bug, we'll fix it. And fixing 1 or 2 bugs in a sprint as they come in is really, really easy. Trying to schedule a backlog of 600 bugs, no one wants to do that. And chances are, if it's important, it'll come back. I've learned that a lot. So that's one of the things you can do. The other thing that I talked to some people about doing this at Lean Coffee this morning is if you've got a regression sprint or a hardening sprint where you do some regression testing, just stop. Just don't do it. And it might be really painful the first time you do it because maybe some stuff's going to get through to production and your customers are going to yell. They probably yell anyway. But as soon as I did this with my developers at Fundamo, is that they suddenly went, oh, we don't really have that safety net. We better test in the sprint because we don't have that time when we might catch stuff. There used to be a phrase of like, well, we'll just push it to hardening. We'll deal with that in hardening. We'll deal with that in hardening. And actually the team came up with a phrase which was ban the phrase, move it to hardening. So every time someone said that, they're like, no, you can't say that. So just get rid of it, pull off the Band-Aid and see what happens, because suddenly you start taking more accountability and the team starts sharing the pain and going, okay, well, let's think about testing earlier.
You can also run learning sessions. So a lot of these testing techniques that you're learning at this conference, most of the people in your team don't even know about them. And chances are, if they knew about them, they might use them. So things like exploratory testing, that can be quite fun if you explain it to people in your team. Maybe people aren't interested at all, but chances are other people will be interested and might help you in the future. One of the things we did at a company was we ran a coding dojo. Now, it's been many, many years since I've coded, so it was by no means because I had any coding background. You just need to be able to facilitate a session. And what we asked was that every developer paired with a tester to do this dojo, and we ran it for an hour. And they had so much fun trying to get through. It was the string kata, which meant you had to write a test first and then write the code to pass the test. And they had so much fun, they wanted to run it every Friday from then onwards, just because they were working together and learning together. And these are things that you guys can do at your organizations.
We actually, that client, they even started, the Scrum Master was feeling a bit left out, so the Scrum Master's like, well, hell, I'm going to pair with someone too. And then this was someone who didn't come from a technical background at all, and she started looking at code and going, oh, actually, this isn't so hard to understand. So reducing those barriers so it's easier for people to...
Just a sec. So this morning in our lean coffee, Janet also mentioned it's not about testers learning to code. It's more about testers learning to have technical awareness. And so if you run these things, it's not about you learning to code. It's about you being able to see code and recognize code, not being a developer.
Cool. So let's move on to visual impact.
So the right metrics can help with behavior change. The wrong metrics can hurt behavior change. So these are some metrics we found on the internet, ways to tell. Ron Jeffries, yeah.
Metrics.
And a story I have here is actually about my wife, who's a developer, and she was working with her dev partner at work, Grant, and my wife likes pairing because she wants to learn from a senior developer because she's very junior. But the senior developer doesn't really like pairing because he sees it as a bit of a waste of his time. He feels he's more effective and efficient when he's working by himself. So they decided one sprint to pair together and then the next sprint to work apart because he was convinced they would complete more stories that way. It turned out they completed the exact same amount of stories. And what their Scrum Master pointed out was that the sprint that they paired in, they had almost no bugs. But the sprint they worked apart, they had loads of bugs. And so a simple metric like that can help you see what's working for your team and what's improving with preventing bugs in the first place.
So we see a lot of people use and abuse metrics. Probably the most abused metric in Agile is velocity because, we all want a bigger one, so we just multiply our story points by 100. But what's really important about metrics is to decide what behavior you want to change. So maybe you do want to reduce the number of issues that customers find, or maybe you want to reduce the number of times the customer yells at you. Figure out how you're going to change that behavior, and then figure out how to craft a metric that will measure that behavior change for you. It's less about the number and more about the behavior change. And I mean, these are just some example ones. We're not going to recommend a metric to you because actually it's about crafting the right metric for your team to see the behavior change you want. And once you've crafted it and you've seen that behavior change and the metric suggests it, then throw that metric away and find a new one because now you want a new behavior change. So that's just something to be aware of with metrics is don't keep the same one forever and that's the number of bugs we have and, we must be awesome so we don't need to do any more testing. So on to the last step, start a movement. So the first thing that you can start doing here is start spreading this outside of your team. So if you've now got your show me column and you're doing your testing tasks and you're getting your whole team on board and you've educated them what pairing is and TDD and they're all doing it and that's awesome, that's great. You've solved the problem for one team. Now you need to step outside and start solving that for the other teams in your organization. So you can do sessions like the coding dojo and invite anyone from the organization. You can arrange swapping things where you and your team swap out someone with another team and you get to see how things work on each other's teams. Anything that you can do to move outside of your team into the rest of the organization. You can also then move outside of your organization into your community. So,
hands up, who of you go to meetups on testing, on Agile? Excellent. There are loads of meetups. Hand up, who goes to lean coffees?
Yeah.
Yes. So get out there, spread the word, tell people about mind maps and exploratory testing and coding dojos and this and that and everything you pick up at this conference. Because the more you talk about it, the more the movement can get started.
Yeah, and let's get more people on board to do this thing. So then once you've moved outside of that into your local community, go big, go international, come to a conference in a completely different country, attend sessions, and even better, give talks. Talk about your experience and what you've done.
What's the one in South Africa?
Let's Test is
Let's
currently
Test has just come to South Africa. So
Sam and I have offered this at lots of conferences, but we offer it to you. So if you want to submit a talk to a conference and you've never done it before, Sam's really good at getting conference things accepted. She knows exactly what they're looking for because she's been on a track chair many times for Agile. If you want some help in getting a talk accepted and crafting your submission, send us an email because we will help you tell your story. The things that really, really connect with people is people saying, well, I had this problem, and then we tried some stuff, and it didn't work, and then we tried some other stuff, and it worked, and hey, that was cool. Because that's what people want to try in their own organization. They don't just want to hear from the experts. They want to hear from everyone who's tried something. And then last but not least, go global. Start your own hashtag, and you can influence everyone on Twitter.
yeah, we've given you some here.
Maybe you want to name it a little bit better than the no estimates hashtag, because, well, I don't know.
It's controversial, though. It gets a
It
lot
is.
of people
a lot
talking.
Of people know about who knows about the no estimates hashtag? Yeah, okay, so maybe they named it correctly.
No testing. I didn't think of that at the time.
We could do a no testing hashtag. you can get it started. It's already been
there we
done.
go.
Okay, we'll have to come up with a new one.
So you can piggyback on it.
Yeah. But so just to share a little bit about what we've done with starting a movement is, back when we started our company, I think it was 2012, Sam and I were super keen, and we thought testing was this awesome thing that people should do better. And so we invited Janet to come to South Africa and do two courses, one in Cape Town and one in Johannesburg, on the whole team approach to testing, and we thought this is going to be awesome. And then we found out we really suck at selling training courses because we only managed to fill one of them, and instead Janet had a nice holiday in Cape Town instead of doing a course. And at the time we thought, maybe we read the industry wrong. Maybe they're not ready for this. But you know what? They're now having Let's Test. It's 3 years later, and a whole bunch of people, in fact, someone who attended that course gave a talk at Agile Africa on how he pairs with the developers and what he does. So it just started small. It started with an idea, and it's spreading, and it's global. And you can start a movement too. So
I'd like you to think about, what step are you on personally in your organization? Are you just at the awareness stage where you make aware how many bugs you have and how bad the quality is? Are you at the punishment phase where you're in the pain of regression sprints, one after the other? Are you in the personal responsibility where you're personally doing what you can to help your team? Are you at the removing barriers stage where you're getting rid of things like regression sprints? Are you measuring the impact that you have at your organization? Or maybe you've started a movement. So I'd like you to turn to the person next to you or behind you or in front of you if you're at the back, and just tell them quickly which step you think you're at.
really?
Thank you. Now I'd like you to turn to someone else and tell them what step you'd like to be at. Okay, put up your hand if anyone wanted to start a movement. Anyone? Excellent. So what I'd like you to do now is, can we have the lights on in the hall? Just a sec.
That's a difficult request.
I think it is.
He's submitting a change form.
There is electricity in Germany. I've tested it. It's just South Africa that has no electricity. Thank you.
No one's ever got an applause for turning a light on before.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is make eye contact with someone at the other end of the room. And I want you to shout to them, start a movement.
Go!
Go.
I think we may have started a movement, Sam.
Well, we started something.
Okay, so Sam and I, we don't really like doing keynotes, although it was lovely to be invited, because we don't like talking as much as we like seeing you talk. So, of course, we ended early so that we can have an opportunity for questions. So,
Yeah.
You run.
I run. Thank you. Do you think it's necessary or typical to go through these steps in linear order, or could you just mix it up? Would you recommend that?
I don't think you have to go through them in a linear order. In fact, if you can skip a whole bunch, that would be cool. So I think, and you could probably do a whole bunch of them in parallel as well. So I think it was just, we were really trying to look at what are different levels and where some people might get stuck because, for example, it's too hard. So I can own it personally, but I don't actually know how to get other people involved because I haven't thought about making it easier for them. So it's more of a thinking process than a set of steps that you should follow in order. Yeah.
More questions?
Only the front row wants to ask questions because they don't want you to run.
Can you give some examples of what you did to go from you couldn't sign people up for a testing course in 2012 and now you're having a testing conference?
Yeah, okay. So am I answering them all because you don't have a mic? Okay. So I think firstly it started by, spreading some awareness that we had the course, and we were really lucky that the people who came on the course then went back to their organizations and started to make some changes. We followed up with a couple of them about, I want to say it was almost a year later. We went to go see some of the people and we said to them, well, you went on that course a year ago. What have you changed since you did the course? And we actually got some of them to write a guest blog post for us on what had changed since they'd been on the course and how, the one company, they basically rethought their entire automation strategy and just dumped all of their GUI tests because they were just like, we just decided to give up and start over. And so we shared some of that on our blog. We also started doing lots of talks. Sam's going to talk now.
So what we also noticed was, although we stopped doing it publicly, we still kept preaching about it at organizations. And a lot of companies had the pain of testing at the end of the sprint, etc. And we'd start to run workshops with teams, and we'd introduce some techniques like mind mapping and the show me column and different colored stickies so that it became an activity instead of a thing that happened after development. And slowly that seems to have filtered through the companies and through the community. And so people are now, they now know to ask for agile testing. They know to ask for that kind of training and that level of training.
We also started doing talks at conferences about agile testing. Completely by accident, we talked at Agile Africa, and we at the end of it, we kind of came up with a testing manifesto, just because everyone should have a manifesto, and it sounded cool. And we had no idea how popular it would be. It was like, oh wow, that's really doing well on Twitter. So people started seeing that, and then Sam drew a pretty slide, and so they retweeted it a whole lot more.
Then it got translated into other languages, and awesome.
So kind of things that happened by accident.
So starting a movement, creating a manifesto is one way.
Yeah, manifestos are really, really big for starting a movement. But people started hearing things, and I think it was just starting the conversation. And now we've gotten to the point where other people have found it's something they can attach onto, and we're not even doing the movement. We had nothing to do with bringing Let's Test to South Africa. Other people did, but they just saw that we'd built enough momentum in the community that those things could start to happen. We'll probably have an Agile Testing Days there one day. Hey. Yeah. So, yeah, yes.
Speaking about metrics, could you give some example from your experience, based on your experience, what works and what not?
I'll let you answer this one, Sam.
Thanks. So often what we see is people have a metric of how many bugs they have. So at the end of every sprint, we have 100 bugs. Next sprint, we have 120 bugs. We don't like that kind of metric because it's there, it's visible, but it's more in the awareness space. So the kind of metric we prefer is we fixed 20 bugs. We fixed 15 bugs. That kind of metric is more encouraging to teams and makes them want to fix more, because that's a number that you're kind of gaming because they want it to be higher.
Yeah. Although, of course, as a gamer, I can immediately think I would just report a whole bunch of arbitrary bugs just so that I could fix them and make the numbers seem higher. So there's that. But my two favorite metrics that I use in Agile teams actually have nothing to do with testing, but they kind of do as well. And the first one is the number of stories in progress at any one time. Because if that number is equal to the number of people on your team, they are not collaborating. That number should be 1 or maybe 2. If 1 or maybe 2 stories are in progress at any point in time, that means the whole team are working together on that. That means it's not the developers getting ahead and then dumping it in the tester's lap at the end. It's that the testers and developers are working together. So that's one of my favorite metrics. And, the ways you game it generally are good behavior as well. And then the other one is cycle time on stories. So how long does it take from when you start a story to when it's complete? That should be like
2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days in a 2-week sprint. Not every single story takes 2 weeks because we're basically just doing mini waterfall and everyone's got their own stories.
That also prevents you from the developers starting stories and the testers waiting till the end to test, because the cycle time will be way longer.
But yeah, some fun ones might be, how many test tasks could we do before any development, and what percentage of our test tasks had to wait, or try get that number to as few as possible. Just think of the behavior you want to change and craft something around that.
And ask the team. They're quite good at coming up with this stuff.
Sure.
Not so much as a question. I was just talking to George here, and he said, instead of punishment, which is kind of a harsh word, how about we just say, what was it?
The natural consequences of your actions.
Just expose them. I thought that was a great way of thinking about it.
I like consequences. So, we could change that.
More questions? Here. Okay.
I'll stand up so everybody can see me. So my question is, if we want to go to the START movement, because that's like from all the faces, whoever is there. How to make the movement to be accepted from the team? Because if I make a movement but nobody is following it or nobody is respecting me, it's, again...
Oh, I don't know what that...
So this is how easy it is to start a movement. So I don't know, have any of you seen the YouTube video about starting a movement with the dancing? Yes? Okay. The first follower thing, yeah. So how it goes is the first person dancing looks like a fool, right? I look like a tool, right?
Yes, you do.
But if one person joins me,
You look like a bunch of tools.
now there's two people, but it's not as scary, right? So now if we have a third person join us, now we have a movement.
No, I feel like I'm missing out.
So now if you want to join us, you can stand and dance. Yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, we need music for that.
So quite easy to start a movement. You need 2 followers.
Yeah.
One and one other.
Yeah, start with your first follower and then work on your second one.
Bribery works too.
Yeah. And if it looks like you're having fun, people will want to join you. So whatever you're doing, I mean, we don't like to do things by making training sessions mandatory. We're going to now have a mandatory TDD training session, but play the TDD with Lego game over lunchtime one day, and people will come because Lego, awesome. So yeah, and then just make it a fun way for people to get involved if they want to be, and they might just open their minds to it.
Cool. Anyone else?
You mentioned meetups, so I've organised several meetups in the UK and peer conferences and things like that. Can you give advice to the audience about how to go about setting up a meetup?
Yes.
I could, but it's not my talk.
So I was quite involved in the Scrum user group in South Africa for a long time. Probably the biggest tip I have is find other people who are as committed and passionate as you are to help you out. Doing it all by yourself is quite difficult, and you'll eventually run out of steam. The other thing that worked really, really well for us was making sure it's regular. So we do the first Thursday of every month, and people just know, so it's in their calendar and they know when it's going to be. They're not waiting for the invite to come out before they then book it. What we find, I don't know how this translates to other countries or places, but making sure it's a location that's easy to get to. So we normally have them after work, and we have them in the city centre, because if you had them anywhere else, you'd sit in traffic to get there. So picking a location and getting a location that people can easily get to helps. But literally that regular consistency and having it, and then look for interesting things to do. So people will keep coming to a meetup group if they're having fun and they're getting value from it. So meetup groups that kind of die is because there's not new, interesting ideas. So what you've got to be interested in doing, and you've got to have other people who are helping to organize, is seek out people who have stories to share. You might have to bribe quite a few people to come do talks, and get people who've never spoken before to come do talks, because actually sharing their stories are really helpful. And if you're really struggling, then you can do things like lean coffees or open space or anything like that gets people to create content without having to look for speakers.
So another thing we did was we started an Agile breakfast, and we basically just sent an email out to people and said, we want to talk about some Agile stuff. We're going to do it over breakfast starting at 8 at this cafe. And 12 people pitched, and we're like, oh, that's quite cool. And I passed around a notebook and asked everyone to write down one thing that they were talking about at that point in time. And then I sent out another email to everyone I'd emailed before with the list of what we'd spoken about at that Agile breakfast. And we were running one every month, every 2 months. Every 2 months. And that grew so crazily that at one stage, 80 people arrived and the restaurant wouldn't let us in.
We had to start limiting it.
So I was like, okay, I guess we have to limit the numbers now. And then we started limiting the numbers and we started moving it to different locations so that different people would come to the breakfast. We don't actually run them anymore,
Because we're too busy.
but you can just do something like that. So if it's somewhere close by and everyone can get to it, and people have to eat in any case. They'll come.
I do have one tip. I'm not sure how PC it is, but have wine or beer. People talk a lot more over wine and beer.
Not for breakfast.
You can have champagne at breakfast. but in contrast, the user group that started in a different city to ours, because they were at a corporate venue that didn't allow food and didn't allow alcohol to be consumed on the premises, they used to have their meetups, and it was literally a speaker would give a talk, and then everyone would go home. And we're like, where's the talking and the drinking and the having fun? And we suddenly realized that we'd done it by accident because, we're partially alcoholics. I wasn't supposed to say that. But we'd done it by accident, but people really enjoyed the networking and the talking over drinks afterwards. So I don't know if you find that in your experience, but I say have booze. It helps.
If anyone wants a copy of this slide, I've got a few printouts over here.
You can have a Sam Laing original.
Yeah.
More questions? Any questions? Thanks so much.